You didn't stop believing in love. You stopped believing it would be safe. There's a difference. And if you've ever met someone genuinely wonderful, felt something real beginning to grow, and then quietly, almost secretly, started pulling back, you already know what that difference feels like from the inside. You didn't leave because you didn't care. You left, or you shut down, or you kept one foot out the door, because somewhere underneath all of it, a part of your mind had already run the calculation. And the answer it kept returning was the same one it always returns. This will hurt eventually. It always does. That's not pessimism. That's not emotional immaturity. That is what psychology calls a protective schema. A deeply held belief your brain built to keep you from going back to a place it remembers as dangerous. And today, we're going deep inside that psychology. Because if you've ever wondered why loving someone feels less like joy, and more like standing at the edge of something you might not survive again, this video was made for you. Let's start with something most people never say out loud. Being scared to love again doesn't look the way people think it looks. It doesn't look like someone sitting alone in a dark room, refusing all connection. It's quieter than that, more sophisticated than that. It looks like someone who shows up to dates, but finds something wrong with every person they meet. Not because those people are wrong, but because finding the flaw first hurts less than being surprised by it later. It looks like someone who is warm, funny, and genuinely present, right up until the moment things start getting real. And then without being able to explain why, they go cold. They create distance. They pick a fight over something small. They get busy suddenly. They disappear. Not because they stopped caring, but because they started caring too much. And that felt like the beginning of danger. It looks like someone who says, "I'm just not ready," on a loop, year after year, while privately wondering if ready is a place they'll ever actually reach. It looks like you, maybe, reading this, recognizing something. And that recognition matters. Because this fear, the fear of loving again, doesn't just live in your feelings. It lives in your nervous system. It lives in the patterns you repeat. It lives in the people you choose and the ones you push away, often without fully understanding why. Here's what psychology tells us about where this fear comes from. It doesn't always come from one dramatic, obvious event. Sometimes it does. A betrayal so sharp, you remember exactly where you were standing when it happened. A relationship that ended in a way that redefined your understanding of what people are capable of doing to someone who trusted them completely. But for many people, the wound is quieter than that. It was accumulated, built slowly, over months or years, out of smaller moments that individually seem survivable, but together, taught the nervous system a lesson it never forgot. It was the relationship where you gave everything, and still weren't enough. The partner who made you feel like your emotions were too much, too often, too loud. The connection that felt like home until it didn't, and then the floor just disappeared. The person who told you they loved you, and then, without warning or adequate explanation, chose to leave, or stayed, but in a way that was somehow lonelier than being alone. Psychologists refer to these experiences as attachment injuries. They are moments, or patterns of moments, where the person who was supposed to be a source of safety became instead a source of pain. And the mind, which is extraordinarily efficient at pattern recognition, took note. It filed away a conclusion, not in words, but in sensation. In the way your chest tightens when someone gets too close. In the way you flinch, almost invisibly, when someone says something that sounds like the beginning of the sentences that hurt you before. The wound isn't weakness, it's memory. And memory in the body is remarkably hard to argue with. To understand why this fear is so persistent, you need to understand something about how the brain processes emotional pain. When you experience a significant loss or betrayal in a close relationship, your brain doesn't just process it as a sad event. It processes it as a threat. The same neural systems that respond to physical danger, the amygdala, the threat detection networks, they activate in response to emotional pain, especially pain that comes from someone you were deeply attached to. This is called social pain theory, and the research behind it is striking. Brain imaging studies show that the pain of rejection and social loss activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. Your brain, at a neurological level, does not cleanly distinguish between the two. And what does the brain do after experiencing a serious threat? It learns, it adapts, it builds a predictive model designed to help you recognize and avoid that kind of danger in the future. Psychologists call the result of this process an anxious or avoidant attachment style, depending on how your nervous system responded to the pain. Some people become hypervigilant in relationships, scanning constantly for signs that abandonment is coming, needing constant reassurance, because the threat detector never fully quiets down. Others become avoidant. They detach preemptively, keep relationships at a carefully managed distance, because the nervous system has decided that closeness itself is the risk. Both are the same wound, just two different exit strategies. And here is the part that makes this fear so difficult to reason your way out of. The protective system your brain built was built to operate below conscious thought. It doesn't wait for you to decide to be afraid. It acts first. The withdrawal, the emotional unavailability, the sudden coldness when things get real. These aren't decisions you make. They are responses your nervous system executes on your behalf, faster than thought, because it believes it is protecting you. You are not broken. Your brain is doing exactly what a brain does after it has been hurt badly enough. The problem is, it cannot always tell the difference between the person who hurt you and the person standing in front of you right now. So what does all of this actually look like in your daily life? It looks like self-sabotage that you don't recognize as self-sabotage in the moment. You choose people who are emotionally unavailable, not because you don't know better, but because available feels overwhelming, because someone who truly wants you requires you to truly show up. And showing up fully means you can be fully hurt. It looks like a pattern of almost relationships, things that get close to something real and then dissolve, just before they'd have to become something you'd have to risk losing. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll notice that you were often the one, consciously or not, who ensured they dissolved. It looks like walls disguised as standards. I just have high standards is sometimes true, but sometimes it is a very intelligent, very believable story. The mind tells itself to justify keeping everyone at a safe distance. It looks like the inability to receive love gracefully. When someone is genuinely kind to you, genuinely consistent, genuinely choosing you, it feels suspicious. It feels like something you're waiting to be taken away. And so instead of relaxing into it, you hold your breath. You wait for the catch. You find subtle ways to test whether it's real, over and over, in ways that sometimes drive the very love away that you were terrified of losing. Research by psychologist Dr. John Bowlby, who developed attachment theory, showed that these patterns are not character flaws. They are logical adaptations. They served a purpose at a specific time in your life. The tragedy is that they don't automatically update when your circumstances change. The old software keeps running on new relationships, misreading safe people as threats, reading warmth as a trap, reading commitment as the beginning of an inevitable loss. Here is what almost nobody tells you about the fear of loving again. The fear is not really about the future. It is about the past that hasn't been processed yet. When you imagine falling in love and immediately feel a contraction in your chest, that contraction is not a prediction about the person in front of you. It is a memory stored in your body, triggering a response that was built for a completely different situation. You are not afraid of this person. You are afraid of what the last person or the person before that, or the relationship pattern that stretches all the way back to your earliest experiences of closeness. And your nervous system, trying its best to keep you safe, has decided that the solution is to never go back there again. But here is the thing. Closing yourself to love does not protect you from pain. It just changes the shape of it. The grief of losing a relationship is finite. It ends. But the grief of a life spent on the periphery of connection, never quite letting anyone close enough to really matter, that grief accumulates quietly, invisibly, for years. Psychologist Brené Brown's research on vulnerability puts it plainly. You cannot selectively numb emotion. When you shut down the channels through which pain could enter, you shut down the same channels through which joy, love, and genuine belonging could enter. The armor keeps out everything equally. The fear of loving again is not keeping you safe. It is keeping you small. So what do you do with all of this? The answer is not to force yourself to be brave, not to override the fear with sheer willpower, not to simply decide to trust again and hope the nervous system cooperates. That is not how this works. You cannot think your way out of a response that lives below thought. What actually works, according to research on attachment and trauma recovery, begins with something much simpler. It begins with recognition. You cannot change a pattern you cannot see. So the first step is exactly what you've been doing in this video. Observing, noticing, naming what has been running in the background of your relationships, without your full awareness. Because what has a name can be examined, and what can be examined can slowly begin to change. The second step is what therapists call a corrective emotional experience. This is the understanding that the fear was learned in relationship, and it can only be unlearned in relationship, not by finding a perfect person who will never hurt you. That person does not exist, but by finding or building connections where the risk is taken in small increments, where you practice staying present when the instinct says to run, where you let someone see a little more of you than feels comfortable, and you discover that the world did not end, not all at once, not recklessly, but deliberately, repeatedly, in small enough doses that the nervous system can begin to update its model, to learn through direct experience rather than intellectual argument. That closeness does not always equal danger. The third thing, and perhaps the most important, is this. You have to grieve what happened to you. Really grieve it. Not just narrate it, not just intellectually acknowledge that it was painful, but sit with the actual loss, the trust that was broken, the future you imagined that didn't happen, the version of yourself that went into that relationship open and came out guarded. That person deserved better. And until you mourn what they lost, part of you will keep living in the wound, trying to prevent it from happening again, never quite believing it's safe to come out. Healing from the fear of loving again is not about becoming someone who doesn't get hurt. It is about becoming someone who trusts their own ability to survive hurt and chooses love anyway, not naively, not with desperate hope that this time nothing will go wrong, but with the quiet, earned confidence of someone who has looked clearly at the risk, felt the fear fully, and decided that a life of genuine connection is worth it. You were not wrong to protect yourself. Whatever you went through, whatever made you build those walls, it made sense. The fear made sense. The distance made sense. At the time, with what you had, it was the most intelligent response available to you. But you are not who you were then. And the person who might love you now is not the person who hurt you before. The fear tells you that love is a place you've already been and barely survived. What it doesn't tell you is that the version of you who went through that is not the version of you standing here now. You know things now. You understand yourself now in ways you didn't then. You have survived the thing you were most afraid of, and you are still here, still feeling, still capable of being moved by the possibility of something real. That is not a small thing. That is actually everything. Being scared to love again does not mean you are closed. It means you are human. It means something mattered to you enough to leave a mark. And marks, given enough time and enough honesty, don't just become scars. They become the most trustworthy parts of who you are. The parts that know the difference between what's worth protecting and what's worth risking. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be willing. And maybe today, in having watched this, you are already a little more willing than you were before. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more content that goes this deep. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment. Tell me where you are in this. I read them. You are not as alone in this as the fear wants you to believe.